Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. So I thought tonight I would talk about three slightly separate topics, but they're all a bit interlinked, and hope it flows in a way that makes sense to you. So the first one I thought I would try to address is the question or the topic of the 4 Brahma Viharas. Now I have been mentioning these practices or these qualities in the course of the retreat, and no doubt there are some of you who are very familiar with what I mean when I say the Brahma Viharas, but I think for some of you it will be relatively new. So I'd just like to go over that a little bit and explain it in a little bit more depth, because we have been practicing the Brahma Viharas to a degree in the morning, usually in the early morning, and in particular the first 2. The first one is metta, or loving kindness, and the second one is karuna, or compassion. So what's the difference between metta on the one hand and karuna on the other? Metta is the wish, we cultivate the wish that other people or another being be happy. We want them to be happy, we want them to be well. Whereas compassion, or karuna in Pali, is about feeling for them in their suffering. We want their suffering to be alleviated. We feel with them. So we have this word in English, com, with passion, with feeling. So those are the first 2, metta and karuna. Now the third one is called mudita in Pali, and it's translated sometimes as sympathetic joy, sometimes more recently some people use the words altruistic joy. I think we don't have a problem in the West with understanding what metta means. It means kindness and goodwill and so on. Or karuna, we understand that if people are suffering, they need some kind of support or a wish that their suffering end. But mudita, I think, presents Westerners with a bit of more of a problem, because they're not used to this particular quality or the cultivation of such a quality. So what mudita means is that if someone is experiencing good fortune, if they are experiencing some kind of luck or some kind of success or happiness has arisen in their life, we practice or cultivate a feeling of sympathy for them and joy that they are doing so well. Now, again and again, it's my impression in the West, I'm not probably in every society, but particularly in competitive societies, very competitive societies, people are quite envious. We live in a kind of individualistic environment. And yes, well, we have friendships and we love people, but there's also this thing about, I want to be better off than they are, or I don't want them to get one on top of me. So if they ask, suddenly, oh, my daughter's getting married, or it's a new baby, or good fortune, some kind of financial success has arrived, or promotion, of course, or a beautiful new house, it's often a case that people feel envy. And they think, well, this is your pride before a fall. Just wait till the financial markets crash or something like this. So this is perhaps an habitual reaction. We feel some kind of envy or resentment that someone is doing better than we are. So it's a very healthy thing to cultivate sympathetic joy for the well-being of others, to rejoice that they are experiencing some happiness and success and some good fortune. And the fourth of these Brahma Viharas is Upekkha, or equanimity. When some of the Western monks were originally in Asia, the early monks, they were trying to find out what was the appropriate translation for these terms, and Upekkha had them a bit stumped. And then some of the Asian monks said, or in India, the monk said, "Oh, Upekkha means indifference." And the Western monks said, "What? Indifference?" They eventually homed in on the term equanimity. So to be equanimous in the face of all kinds of changes, good, bad, and indifferent. And it might seem a strange fourth Brahma Vihara, or the third and fourth ones might seem strange to us in the West, but in fact equanimity is very important, particularly in the cultivation of the Buddhist path. It kind of reinforces or acts as a culmination to all the other three Brahma Viharas. So in Thailand, they've often compared these. They've used the example as a kind of quick reference example, the relationship or the feelings that a parent has or parents have for their children. So first of all, yes, they have loving kindness for their child. They want the child to be happy. And secondly, they have compassion for the child because they don't want the child to have to suffer. And they'll do their best to try and make sure that the child doesn't suffer if they can help it. And then if the child experiences some kind of real success and good fortune and happiness, then the parents are usually delighted. They don't have a problem experiencing mudita, sympathetic joy, for their child. But finally, and this is a crucial aspect, the child grows up, he or she grows up, and then he or she makes their own decisions. They find their own path in life, their own. They set their own course. Their parents may have brought them up in a certain way and expect them to go down the track. This happens again and again, doesn't it? I know my parents expected, or my mother expected me to get married, live in the suburbs of London, commute to London, something like that. You know. She wanted me to be a regular guy. Look at me now. I can think of a family in Sussex that we know through the monasteries, where the father had a very strong influence on his daughter. She was is a very brilliant girl. She would get straight A's at A-level and stuff like this. And but she was different. She and her brother were different to other children, and they tended to mix more with adults for some reason. And she was a kind of autodidact. She'd come home to study on her own, rather than being in the school so much. But she did very well. And her father had plans for her. I think she was learning violin, and I don't know what all the plans were. But at some point she changed course, decided to become a nurse, and she met and set up house with a much older man, which didn't please her. So anyway, what the parents have to do when the children grow up is to let go. They have to be able to recognise that they can't control their child, and to practice equanimity in the face of whatever the child has chosen to do, even if they can't really understand what the child has chosen to do. So there are a couple of poems I'd like to just sort of put in front of you, one which I think are connected with equanimity. And the first one is a poem, a Chinese poem, so it goes something like this. It's very good to remember anyway as a reminder for certain things in our lives. So 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If the mind is not clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. So 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind is not clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. And I think this is about preferences, wanting for and against certain things, resisting certain things, demanding certain things. These are the unnecessary things. But if we can let go of those things, be equanimous around them, this is the best season of your life. And the other one is a famous verse. I can't remember this one, so I'll have to read it. So it's from something called the Zing Min, which I think means verses on the faith mind. It was written by a Zen patriarch several hundred years ago. And this is one among several translations, so I'll read it. And it's from the Zen tradition, but it's relevant to us. So the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike, is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. So I won't read it a second time, but you might like to find that sometime, the Zin Min, by this, I think it's the 6th Zen patriarch. So the great way being, of course, the way to cultivate. The great way is not difficult for one who has no preferences. So we all have friends, relatives, people that we're connected to, and sometimes they do things we just don't understand. They go off on a track that we can't relate to at all. Possibly it's a track of self-destruction. And we try our best to help that person in any way we can. But if they really won't listen and they have to go down a certain path, we have to cultivate equanimity around this, because they have made that choice. We can do our very best to persuade them not to walk down a path of disaster. But if they choose to go down that path, there's not a lot we can do, except to remain open to them, I suppose. And at the same time, we may wonder in our minds what on earth impels the person to go down the path of self-destruction or some very unwise path. So I can give you the Buddhist answer. I'm not asking you to believe in this. I take all these things as a kind of working hypothesis or possibility, no more than that, myself. But the Buddhist explanation is this: karma. What has gone before conditions what follows. In other words, we've laid down seeds, maybe in a previous life, if such a thing has happened, which bear fruit in a later life. Or we lay down seeds that bear fruit in this life. We don't know. If this is true, if the Buddha's description of how things work is true, we don't know what's happened in that person's previous life. They may be a blood relative, or a very close friend, or someone we've known since childhood, but we don't know what preceded this lifetime, do we? So we have to be open to what people do. They're a mystery. And one sort of slightly convincing thing for me about karma, if you want to hear this, is the existence of child prodigies. Apparently, Thomas Babington Macaulay, John Stuart Mill could read Greek at the age of 3 or 4, and he was writing a history of the church at 4 or 5, something like that. Bentham was equally brilliant, and Macaulay was writing a compendium of history at the age of 6. Can you imagine that, a 6-year-old child writing a compendium of world history? Beethoven was giving public performances at the age of 7. Mozart was writing music before the age of 6. And Voltaire was apparently reading the fables of La Fontaine at the age of 3. So what is our own explanation for this? We say, oh, it's a genius, a genius, a genius. But could it be that in some previous life, some seeds were laid down, some actions performed that resulted or helped to result in such abilities and talents as we see in child prodigies? So what exactly is karma? We have to rely in this tradition on what the Buddha has said about it. Karma literally means action, and karma vipaka means result. In English language we can talk about cause and effect. And if we look around us, we can perhaps begin to see all the time causes and effects in the way that people's behaviour brings forth results later on. So one way of speaking about this without being sort of too personal or threatening is to say, well, if you plant apple seeds you get apple trees, and therefore apples. If you plant pear seeds, you get pear trees, and therefore pears. You sow the seeds, and then somewhere down the line, whether it's this lifetime or another one, if we to believe this, the fruits appear at the right moment. It's not the moment of our choice, or anybody's choice, but the moment when the karma ripens. Or in the Christian tradition, there's a rather threatening phrase, isn't it? As they sow, so shall they reap. It's frightening, isn't it? Anyway, the attendant of the Buddha, Ananda, once said, Lord, I think I really do understand all about karma. It's so obvious. And the Buddha says, no, there's nothing obvious about it. It's very profound and very difficult to understand. So we could put it in a very crude way, a sort of couple of comparisons. We make karma is what we do as a result of intention, or we often use this word volition. So it's intentional action by body, speech or mind. It's not about involuntary action. So if you happen to sort of jerk in a certain way and something unfortunate happens and the lights go out or something, that wouldn't be regarded as karma, I don't think. But anyway, it's what you intend, what you want to do, even if it's a lightning decision to go this way rather than that, if it's coming from your intention. So we talk about intentional action by body, by speech, and also, in Buddhism, by mind. So I'll just draw some very crude sort of pictures. Intentional action by body. Let's say you see an old lady in the street. So you could help the old lady across the road. Or you could steal her purse. That's action by body. Or intentional action by speech. You could say something kind and supportive to someone. You could encourage them. Help them in their worries and doubts, or give them good advice and something like this. That would be sort of skillful speech. Or you could use speech that is lacerating. You could tear someone apart, couldn't you? Using the tongue. We've all experienced this. And then by mind, intentional action by mind, well, I suppose perhaps in the West we would say, well, what does it matter about my mind, you know? But if people allow their minds to dwell in hatred, in thoughts of hatred, ill will, aversion, resentment, envy, bitterness, and if they allow that track to go unhindered, then that tends to build in a kind of habit. So I think there's a way of saying, a poem, the thought conditions the speech, or the word conditions the deed hardens into a habit, and the habit, if practiced over time, forms character. So anyway, these are intentional actions by body, speech and mind, which is why the Buddha says, karma, O monks, is volition, it is intention. Because the mind intends something and then the person immediately follows that. So we have to look, that's why we look back at our intentions. What was my intention when I did that, when I said that, when I tried to help that person? Was my intention wholesome or not? Was it skillful? I can't always say whether it's skillful, but was it wholesome or was it not wholesome? We may be blaming ourselves for something that we did that brought about apparently a bad result. But we need to go back to the intention. What was the intention? Because if we come from ill will or malevolence, that is what creates the bad karma. And why am I bothering to talk about this? Because if we can relate to this idea of karma and rebirth, and I don't want to go too much into rebirth at this moment, but karma, it can affect how we see the events in our own lives. Because it's not about, if we say, oh, you might think this, you might think, well, I'm suffering a lot, therefore I did bad deeds in a previous lifetime or earlier in this life, and become very passive about your suffering. But it's not about being passive, it's about being connected to a wider picture. Karma is not, we are told, it's not just mechanical, it's much more complex and profound than that. How we act and speak, how we think, can have effects that ameliorate, for example, bad karma. We can, there's black and white, if you like, karma, and if we make good karma, if we have a feeling that maybe we want bad karma, we can try and make good karma to counter that, and all the complexities of the processes. You never know quite what's going to happen, but people in Buddhist countries tend to believe this. So in Thailand you get people who are what they call naklang, or gangsters, or perhaps thieves or criminals, and they've made a lot of what we would consider to be bad karma, intentionally hurting people or stealing from them. But at some point they think, well, I'd better make some good karma, so they come to a monastery and offer food to the monks. You might find that a bit, I suppose, something hypocritical, but anyway, that's what they do. So we can, if we live in a conscious way, with awareness, we try to practice kindness and goodwill towards people and towards all beings, we are creating very positive vibrations for the future. So even if there is this element of bad karma in the way our lives are unfolding, we can do something about it. We're helping the situation. And the comparison they use is this. If we imagine the bad karma as salt, if you have a cup of water and you put the salt, a certain amount of salt in the cup, the water tastes very salty. But if you have a huge lake and you empty the salt into the lake, then it hardly tastes at all. So we can make ourselves a lake of good deeds and good possibilities. That's what is recommended. So apparently a few years ago, probably 1 or 2 decades now, there was a conference, sort of East-West conference on emotions and health. And this was attended by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and also by Western psychotherapists. And in particular they were considering or homing in on what had happened to many Tibetan refugees. And these people at that time were being badly tortured by the Chinese, and escaping from if you like, occupied Tibet or Tibet, and coming to see the Dalai Lama and tell him about their experiences. Now in this conference on emotions and health, as I say, there were quite a number of Western psychotherapists, so they thought it would be of use to the Tibetan representatives there to talk about the effects which they had encountered in their work of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so they went into some quite complicated lengths explaining how PTSD affected people, what the results were in the life afterwards, what was deemed to be the best kind of therapy, and so on. They went into some depth on this topic. But after they had finished, the Dalai Lama turned to them and he said, well, actually, it seems that for the Tibetan people, there is a different experience, which I think must have made a few jaws drop among the psychotherapists. So it turned out from his description that many of these Tibetans who had been tortured, they were, brought up in Buddhism, brought up in the understandings that the Buddha has left us. So even while they were being tortured, some of them were able to practice compassion for their torturers, because they understood that in order to carry out torture, someone has some pretty terrible mind states going on inside of them. Very painful and very, in Western terms we'd say satanic or demonic, wouldn't we? So anyway, some people were able to practice compassion for their torturers. And even those people who couldn't practice compassion for their torturers, they had an understanding around karma. And this understanding that, the effects of a previous lifetime can manifest in this lifetime helps them to survive the experience and allow them to understand it in a wider context, in a longer term context. And because of these two differences, it was claimed by the Dalai Lama that the Tibetans did not experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in the early years of the Sangha here in Britain, there were 2 American Vietnam vets. I lived with one of them, and I knew the other one who still comes over. His name was Babakara, the other one, Joseph, who comes and still comes here and offers teachings along with Ajahn on occasions. I lived with Dhammanando, who had been in Vietnam and who had been shot through the back of the head. He had a metal plate in the back of his head. He'd been flown out of a battlefield and then flown to Hong Kong for an emergency operation, which saved his life at that stage. And he didn't talk about his memories to everyone at all, but apparently he had some pretty heavy memories in his mind from all of this. And one day, someone in the Chithurst wood, the hammer wood at Chithurst, apparently shot shot some kind of pellet or bullet into the hut where Ajahn was sleeping. There was one hut in the forest, and for the rest of the night he was going through flashback of some of his Vietnam experiences. Anyway, the denouement was eventually he did leave the Sangha and went into an intimate relationship with a lady, and he had, around that time his brain tumour began to develop, and eventually within about 2 to 3 years he died. And then this lady Marley came back to the monasteries to try and explain things, because he had kind of departed in a rather sudden way. And when she came back to Chithurst, when I was living at that stage, she brought with her this book called Achilles in Vietnam, and it was by an American psychotherapist who had worked with Vietnam vets. She wanted us to be able to understand that Greg, that was the lay name of Ajahn, was more than anything, he was a Vietnam vet. The experiences, the horrendous experiences he'd had to go through in Vietnam were with him every day, in his makeup, in his psychology. So anyway, I had a chance for a short while to look at this book, Achilles in Vietnam. I can't remember the name of the man that wrote it, but he worked with many, many groups of Vietnam vets. And these were badly disturbed people, very disturbed people. And his conclusion was that the only way that they could finally heal was for them to change their attitude at some deep level. And what was poisoning their attitude was that they saw the Vietnamese that they'd been fighting in 2 different ways. They saw them in one way as, pathetic, hopeless, pyjama-clad gooks. They're gooks. They were reduced to the level of being a gook. But on the other hand, when the Vietnamese were fighting successfully and killing Americans, they were demons. So the Vietnamese were seen either as gooks, pathetic, or demonic. So what the psychotherapists worked towards was to get these men to see that the Vietnamese opponents they had fought were neither gooks nor demons. They were human beings. They were brave men and brave women, just like the Americans were, who had been fighting for something that they believed in. In other words, he asked the American vets to cultivate some kind of compassion and understanding for the Vietnamese they've been fighting. And when they could do that, when they could let go of the gook demon concept and actually understand that their opponents had been people with all the same problems that they had, that was when they began to heal. So I perhaps strayed a little bit off the path here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about karma, because I think it's one of the most, it's a central central concept in some of the assumptions we make as we cultivate this path. If you want to know more precisely where karma comes, we have the Four Noble Truths that we were talking about. The fourth noble truth is the way to the cessation of suffering. So the way to the cessation of suffering is also known as the Noble Eightfold Path. And there are 8 factors on this path. And the first factor is right view. And one of the essential aspects of right view is an understanding of karma, some ability to relate to karma, cause and effect. But the other aspect I wanted to address with you in this particular series of remarks was what we call Vedana, or feeling. Because we touched into what is a human being. I think this was in a small group meeting, so not everyone had heard this, but I can't remember, to be honest. But in the West we see people as body and mind, and maybe we see them as spirit or soul as well. So the Buddha's analysis was 5 khandhas. Form, which is the body itself, and then 4 mental khandhas or aggregates. The first one being feeling, the second one sanya or perception, the third one sankhara or mental formations, and the fourth one consciousness. So I'm not going to go into all the detail of that, but just to say that the second one, feeling, is about a pleasant or unpleasant or neutral feeling that arises with a perception. You see something or somebody, or you hear, or you smell, or you feel through the body, or you taste in the tongue, or you think in the mind, and there's a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling arising even before the full perception. This is what the Buddha would maintain. But feeling is a crucial aspect of our experience. How we perceive things is conditioned by feeling. That which is pleasant we approve of. That which is unpleasant we disapprove of. And neutral things we don't particularly mind too much either way. It affects our relationships, it affects the way we conceive of the world. So there is a sutta, a discourse, at the beginning of the Digha Nikaya, which is the collection of long discourses, and it's called the Brahmajala Sutta, or the Supreme Net. Now in that sutta, the Buddha describes 62 kinds of views that were current in his day. He goes through all these views and points to their inconsistencies and their shortcomings. And then he says, I've got to read this one, I can't remember. So he's talking about himself and his views. So we would say, how strange, if you're talking about views, because we're such rational beings, humans, aren't we? We come up with these very intelligent views. Why would you want to talk about feeling? But what he says is, having truly understood the arising and passing away of feelings, their attraction and peril, and the deliverance from them, the Tathagata is liberated without remainder. Having truly understood the arising and passing away of feelings, their attraction and their peril, and the deliverance from them, the Tathagata is liberated without remainder. So what he's saying is that underlying all these intelligent views, and so well argued and so rational, is feeling. It's what that particular person finds pleasant or preferable, and what they reject, what they find unpleasant. Feeling is underlying those views. It's not rationality. And he sums up these 62 kinds of views and says, well, they're all wrong, because these people are caught by feeling. So this is one of the core teachings of the Buddha, Paticca Samuppada, which is dependent origination, how in our lives we give rise to suffering. And there's a whole series of links in a chain. And I'll just give you a few of those links. Because we have a body, we have 6 sense doors. So that's the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body itself. We touch things, and then the mind. And because we have those sense doors, there is contact. We perceive or we receive impressions through those sense doors. So it's a sight, or a sound, it's a taste or a touch. So contact, that's the contact, gives rise to a feeling. When we experience the world through those sense doors, it's either pleasant or usually unpleasant, or neutral. And this conditions how we react. So this leads on to craving. So the next link in the chain is craving. Vedana, or feeling, conditions craving. Whether we want something, I want that so much, or I don't want it at all. I want to push it away. And then if craving is followed, if we follow that, which we tend to do, it's the normal response, that gives rise to clinging, upadana. We cling to. We want the things that we like, we want to push away the things that we don't like. The grasping that we've been talking about in the previous few days. So feeling conditions craving, which conditions grasping. And there is a very short and pithy quote from Ajahn Chah about clinging. He says, human beings have only one problem, the problem of clinging. Just because of that problem, people will kill each other. So what is seen as the break in the chain, or the possible break in these links which succeed each other very quickly all the time, we're perceiving things and reacting around them, is the link between feeling and craving. That's where the moment of freedom occurs, if we are alert and aware to what's going on in our own minds. So the fact that we have a pleasant feeling, does it mean we have to react to it? Or we have an unpleasant feeling, does it mean we have to react to that? The Buddha's guidance is to get used to feeling, both pleasant and unpleasant, and neutral, and not to be taken in by it. So in the terms of the path that the Buddha laid out, that's the key, one of the key areas to freedom. When we start to let go of these feelings, or know them for what they are, not deny them, but just know them for what they are. So that's probably enough on that. I see a few minds turning off already. But are there any questions around what I've just been, any of the things I've been saying? Okay, Kanu, would you like to come back with your question?
Yes.
If you can remember it.
So I'm starting a work tomorrow, so just want to know how we can sustain mindfulness in a work which is bring a lot of challenges. So yes.
Well, I think you won't be alone there, because so much of our lives in this society is very pressurised. We have a lot of deadlines to meet and huge amounts of work to get through, and I don't think the computer revolution has led to any diminution of work whatsoever. In fact, you just have to talk to the organisers of this retreat centre to hear about new computer systems and what they lead on to. So we have to try and be inventive about ways of introducing mindfulness and practice into our everyday activities. That's all I can recommend. And it is more challenging. Just compare, if you have a farmer, it's like somebody with a scythe cutting grass. It must be so easy to be mindful of that, isn't it? And they're not being hassled by a phone, hopefully. They're just cutting the grass. Or monks, we can't cut grass, but we can sweep paths. So you see in Thailand monks with these long brooms sweeping paths. A nice mindful activity. You can be with that very easily. But in your pressurized workplace in the modern world, you have to create opportunities for reflection, or at least for some kind of space. So the kind of things that people do, when the phone rings, do you answer it immediately? Or do you let it ring perhaps 3 or 4 times, I don't know, before you push the button? You wait and think, well, what's happening here? The phone's ringing. How am I reacting? You introduce a little gap. Or you can introduce gaps around getting in the car. Nowadays you flick the key, don't you, and all the doors go. So then you almost get in there and get on, but then you can wait. Okay, I've opened the doors, and now a few seconds reflection. Or in the workplace, I must say I think computers are the most difficult things to handle, but you can try and be aware, mindful of what's going on in you while you use a computer. I think it's very difficult because it my experience is the computer sucks you in, like sucks your brain into it, and you come out a different person. But I think I'm just old, and younger people don't feel that. So, but however it is, you can then. When I come off a computer, I'm a different person to when I started. There's something going on. So I would recommend sitting and being with that feeling, or maybe standing for a while, doing just standing and coming to the body. So we can come away from a technological implement into something a bit more natural and ground ourselves. Just walking down a corridor, walking upstairs, these can be occasions for coming to the sensation of the feet, or the movement of the body. So we have to really be quite inventive, but we can create spaces if we work at it. I'm sure that it can be done. And you yourself have to find ways. Is it easier, can you walk to work rather than driving? I don't know. Probably too far to go, but that might be one way of introducing a bit more mindfulness into the whole day. And then what do you do with the lunch hour? I don't know. You might want to socialise or eat, but some people might use it for some kind of meditative practice. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of. I was going to say all these things tomorrow. Any other questions? Okay, well, let's go to...
Ajahn?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that Benjamin?
Yeah. Right. Regarding all of the tools and techniques, I find them very helpful. So, for instance, when you feel blame, you apply a technique to jealousy, different things you can meditate on to remedy a negative emotion, say. Would you recommend moving techniques as things arise, or would you recommend dedicating one sitting to a technique and staying with it to the end?
The main technique is to be aware, to recognise what's going on. Again and again we lose it, don't we? We forget, we're not aware, we're caught up in the mind state, and we're believing that mind state, and that mind state is in effect pushing us around, whether it is some strong emotion like jealousy or dislike or something like this. We're being pushed around by that mind state. We've become a victim of it. So the whole practice is about waking up to what's going on right now, coming to the present moment, and recognising what's going on. Now, if you're in a very advanced stage, maybe you have immediate antidotes for them, for all these states, but it might be that you just have to be aware of something. If you're feeling a very strong emotion of, say, greed, you want something very much that someone else has got, or you feel a strong aversion coming up for somebody, you would like to do something about it, but you watch it, you understand, well, this aversion, if I follow this at this particular time, this anger, it's going to cause quite a lot of trouble. So it might be that if you have a certain kind of practice, you have an immediate antidote, but not everyone does. I think we can build in, through practices like metta practice and karuna, as I was saying many times, a kind of fountain of goodwill that we can draw on in moments like that. So I don't know whether that's really an answer to what you said, but you have to find what works, and that's true of everyone here. You have to customize the practice so it does something good for you and helps you. That's the whole point of it. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about those gaps, because so the gaps are to be practiced outside of the situation. So for instance, if anger occurs, would it be possible to have a pause to recognize that occurs, or how would you talk about that?
question she's asking about how much of a gap when a strong emotion arises, like anger. Well, it's how aware we are, how awake we are, and also what kind of a state we're in. You know, if we're in a reasonably equanimous state, and we're feeling bright, and reasonably cheerful and so on, and something comes up, we're going to recognise it quite quickly. But when we're tired and low, you know, something comes up and we grasp onto it just like that. You know, we haven't got the space around it that we would have in a better state. So in a better state, you might well be able to catch something in time, recognise it, let go of it, not act on it. But in a low state, where you're feeling, you know, you're feeling, I'm not so happy with myself, or I'm very tired, or something like this, then you might grasp onto something and act on it. But if you see yourself doing that, one thing you can do is just kind of contain the situation. Okay, I won't act on this. It's not so much that you can let go of the emotion or the prejudice or whatever it is pushing you around, but that you contain the behaviour. You don't let it spill out. So sila, the ethical guidelines, is about containment. We can't cure all the diseases of the mind overnight, but we can contain how we behave. And those guidelines, the 5 precepts, which we'll be offering tomorrow for anyone who wants to take them, are a very clear set of guidelines: not to harm, not to kill, not to steal, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to tell lies, difficult one, isn't it, sometimes, and not to get into drugs, alcohol and intoxicants. So these are perhaps rather broad lines, but they give us an indicator of what is really dangerous, the lines that's really dangerous to cross. And if we do cross those lines, we're making some pretty unfortunate karma for ourselves. So it's the state you're in. Now, if you've only been able to contain things, maybe later on, when you're sitting in practice, in your home or whatever, then you can bring this up. You can recognise whether something, or some unfinished business there. What was triggering this? What was bringing this stuff up in my mind? And you can use a memory to trigger it when you're feeling relatively equable and equanimous, and look at it. That's where the investigation comes in. So there's a sort of immediate bandage job, or elastoplast job. Hold in, contain a reaction if there's one coming. But later on, there's a possibility of investigating more deeply. That's what I would say. Okay, so if we finish off with a chant.